One day, you stop explaining, you stop defending, you stop trying to prove your worth to someone who never saw it. That's the day the spell breaks, not because they changed, but because you finally did. Narcissistic control isn't about physical dominance or obvious authority. It's far more subtle, a slow, psychological conditioning that convinces you your worth depends on their approval. It starts innocently. You want to make things work, you want to be understood, and you believe that if you can just love them a little more or explain yourself a little better, everything will get better. What you don't realize is that every time you try to prove your value, you're stepping a little deeper into their world, a world where your emotional needs don't exist unless they serve theirs. Narcissists thrive on control, but not the kind that comes from shouting or threats. Their control is built on emotional dependency. They teach you, over time, that your peace depends on their mood, that your confidence depends on their compliments, and that your happiness depends on how well you please them. You start bending your boundaries, adjusting your tone, second, guessing your words not because they asked you to directly, but because you've learned what happens when you don't. You learn that silence, withdrawal, or cold indifference are their tools to punish and manipulate. Soon, you find yourself walking on eggshells, trying to prevent the next outburst, the next cold shoulder, the next guilt trip. You start apologizing for things you didn't do and accepting blame for things that were never your fault. What's happening isn't just emotional exhaustion, it's identity erosion. You begin to forget what peace feels like, what confidence sounds like, and what joy used to mean. You live in a state of quiet alertness, waiting for cues to adjust, to fix, to keep the peace. But the truth is, the peace you're trying to protect isn't real. It's conditional, a peace that exists only when you're small enough not to threaten their ego. That's not harmony, that's control. And the longer you live within it, the more your nervous system starts to normalize chaos as love, anxiety as connection, and control as care. You become loyal to the person who keeps you hurting because you've forgotten what it feels like not to. The shift begins when you recognize this pattern, when you realize that the power they hold over you exists only because you keep seeking it. The moment you stop needing their validation is the moment their control starts to dissolve. It's not easy. You'll feel empty at first, like stepping out of a storm and into silence, but in that silence, something beautiful happens. You begin to hear yourself again. You begin to trust your voice, your intuition, your feelings. You start to remember who you were before you were convinced you weren't enough. Freedom doesn't come from fighting the narcissist. It comes from reclaiming yourself, from understanding that their approval was never love, their disapproval was never truth, and their control was never real power. Once you see that clearly, the spell breaks. Their voice loses its authority, their manipulation loses its grip, and your worth becomes something only you define. That's the moment the control truly ends. Hope is the most deceptive tool a narcissist uses to keep you bound to them. It feels like love, it sounds like optimism, and it disguises itself as patience. You tell yourself, maybe if I'm a little more understanding, they'll soften. Maybe if I explain myself better, they'll finally get it. Maybe this time they'll see how much I care. That maybe becomes the invisible chain. It's what keeps you waiting for an apology that never comes, fighting for closure you'll never get, and trying to heal a relationship that was never designed to be mutual. Narcissists understand the human need for hope. They know how powerful it is and how easily it can be used to manipulate. Every small act of kindness, every fleeting moment of affection, every apology that feels almost sincere, it's not change, it's bait. It's just enough to keep you emotionally invested. You cling to those moments because they remind you of who you thought they were or who they promised they could be. You start telling yourself that the bad times are temporary and the good moments are proof that there's still something worth saving. But this hope keeps you locked in a cycle of self-sacrifice. You begin to excuse their behavior, minimize your pain, and suppress your intuition. You start believing that your love has the power to heal them, that your empathy can teach them how to care. Yet, no matter how much you give, it's never enough because they don't want to change, they want control. And hope is how they get it. As long as you believe that change is possible, you'll keep trying. You'll keep showing up, explaining, defending, forgiving, and they'll keep taking. This hope is not a reflection of weakness. It's a reflection of your capacity to believe in people. But with a narcissist, that very light becomes the weapon they use against you. They study your empathy, your kindness, your longing for connection, and they mirror it back to you just long enough to reset the cycle. It's a psychological loop of reward and punishment. Idealize, devalue, discard, repeat. Each time, you fall back into the illusion that the version of them who loved you once will return. The truth is, they never left because that version never existed. What you fell for was the mask, not the person. And the hardest part of breaking free is letting go of the hope that they'll ever take it off. Healing begins when you stop waiting for them to change and start accepting the reality in front of you. It's not your job to fix them. It's your job to save yourself. When you finally stop hoping for the version of them that doesn't exist, you open the door to the version of you that does whole, strong, awake, and free. Hope can heal when it's directed inward, because the future worth believing in isn't one where they change, it's one where you finally do. The real transformation doesn't happen when you walk away from the narcissist, it happens when you stop needing their validation. You can leave the relationship physically, yet still remain emotionally tied to their opinion of you. You replay every conversation, every insult, every silent treatment, wondering what you could have done differently. That's the invisible thread of control, the lingering belief that your worth depends on how they see you. The real freedom begins when that belief dies, when you stop measuring your value through the distorted lens they created. Narcissists thrive on keeping you dependent on their perception. They build a world where you feel powerful when they approve and worthless when they don't. It's emotional conditioning, a constant cycle of reward and rejection. When they praise you, you feel seen. When they withdraw, you panic. You start chasing that approval the way someone chases oxygen. You become addicted to their crumbs of attention, confusing them for love. But here's the truth. Love never makes you doubt your worth. Love never demands that you shrink yourself to feel accepted. The shift happens the moment you begin to see that their opinion isn't sacred, it's strategic. Every compliment, every insult, every cold silence was a tool to maintain control. Once you stop reacting to those tactics, their power begins to crumble. When you no longer flinch at their disapproval, when their silence doesn't trigger your guilt, when you stop defending yourself against their twisted narratives, that's when you reclaim your emotional autonomy. This doesn't mean you become numb or unfeeling. It means you start validating yourself from within. You start asking, what do I think? What do I feel? What do I need? Questions that once felt foreign begin to lead you back home. You stop performing for approval and start living for peace. You start realizing that your sensitivity isn't a weakness, it's your compass. The same empathy that made you easy to manipulate becomes your greatest power once it's directed inward. It's not an overnight shift. You'll still crave their validation at times. You'll still wonder if they ever truly cared. But each time you choose to seek your own truth instead of theirs, you weaken their control a little more. The power dynamic reverses not because you fought harder, but because you stopped playing the game. Eventually, their words lose their sting, their rejection no longer defines you. You stop trying to prove your goodness to someone who benefits from your self-doubt. That's when you realize the control was never real. It only existed as long as you kept handing them the authority to define you. When you stop needing their validation, you return to your own. You begin to see your worth as something unshakable, something untouched by their projections. That's the moment the illusion breaks. That's the moment you become free, not because they lost interest, but because you finally lost the need for their approval. Silence is one of the most misunderstood forms of strength. When you've spent years explaining yourself to someone who twists every word, silence feels unnatural, even wrong. You're used to defending your intentions, clarifying your emotions, and proving your innocence. The narcissist trained you to believe that if you could just say it right, they'd finally understand. But they never wanted to understand. They wanted control, and your words gave them exactly that: more opportunities to manipulate, confuse, and drain you. The moment you stop explaining is the moment you stop feeding their power. Silence doesn't mean giving up. It means reclaiming your energy. It's the quiet decision to stop participating in the drama they create. Narcissists thrive on reaction, whether it's anger, tears, or even desperate attempts to make peace. Every response tells them they still have access to your emotions. Silence, however, sends a message they can't twist, that you've emotionally detached. That's what terrifies them most. When you stop reacting, you stop being a source of supply. You stop being their emotional mirror, the reflection they rely on to feel powerful. At first, silence feels heavy. You'll feel the urge to defend yourself when they lie, to correct the story they tell others, to prove your side. But every time you resist that urge, you build a new kind of strength, a quiet confidence that no longer needs to be seen or validated. You begin to understand that peace is more valuable than being right. Silence becomes your boundary, a sacred space where their chaos cannot reach. It's where you learn that your self-worth isn't dependent on their recognition, and your truth doesn't need their agreement to exist. Silence also creates discomfort, but not for you. It creates it for them. When a narcissist loses your reaction, they lose their favorite weapon. They'll try to provoke you: sudden kindness, guilt trips, or anger. They might even pretend to change just to pull you back in. But your silence speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. It tells them they no longer control your emotions, and without that control, they're powerless. With time, silence stops being a strategy and becomes a state of peace. You stop checking your phone, stop rehearsing what you'd say if they came back, stop hoping they'll finally apologize. Instead, you start listening to your own thoughts again, the ones that were drowned out by their noise. You begin to enjoy the stillness, to find clarity in it. That's when silence transforms from a defense mechanism into a healing space. There is profound power in saying nothing when your voice has been used against you. Silence is not submission, it's sovereignty. It's the moment you stop explaining your worth and start embodying it. It's when you choose your peace over their chaos. And that quiet choice, that calm refusal to engage, is how you finally take your power back without ever having to say a word. Healing after narcissistic abuse isn't about moving on quickly or pretending you're fine. It's about slowly remembering who you were before someone convinced you that you weren't enough. Narcissistic relationships leave deep emotional imprints. They distort your sense of self until you start seeing yourself through their critical, unforgiving eyes. You begin to believe the lies they told you, that you're too sensitive, too demanding, too broken to be loved. Healing is the process of unlearning those lies and returning home to yourself. It's not about becoming who you used to be, it's about discovering who you are underneath all the conditioning and pain. In the beginning, healing feels impossible. You might miss them even though they hurt you. You might question your own memories and wonder if you were the problem all along. That's what narcissistic manipulation does. It rewires your reality. They isolate you from your intuition, erode your confidence, and make you dependent on their version of the truth. The first step of healing is to stop looking for answers in their words and start finding truth in your own body. Pay attention to how you feel when you think about them, the tightness in your chest, the anxiety in your stomach. Those sensations aren't weakness, they're wisdom. They're your body remembering what your mind has tried to rationalize. As you heal, you begin to realize that love shouldn't feel like survival. It shouldn't make you question your worth or silence your voice. You start to see how often you abandoned yourself to keep the peace, how much of your light you dimmed to be easier to love. Healing asks you to stop doing that. It asks you to start showing up for yourself the way you wished others had shown up for you, to speak kindly to yourself when the self-doubt hits, to rest when you're tired of being strong, to forgive yourself for not leaving sooner, for believing the lies, for staying hopeful too long. Reclaiming your identity after narcissistic abuse isn't a single moment. It's 1,000 small choices. Every time you set a boundary, every time you say no, every time you choose peace over chaos, you rebuild trust with yourself. You start realizing that your empathy, which they used as a weakness, is actually your greatest gift. You learn to give it wisely to yourself first, then to others who have earned it. Eventually, you stop needing closure from them because you create it within yourself. You stop defining your worth by who failed to see it. You start feeling joy again, real joy, not the temporary relief that comes from pleasing someone else. That's when you know you're free. Healing isn't about forgetting them. It's about remembering you. It's about reclaiming your voice, your truth, your peace. Because when you finally do, you don't just recover from what happened. You rise from it stronger, wiser, and finally whole. Peace is not something a narcissist will ever give you. It's something you have to choose for yourself, often in the middle of chaos. When you've lived under the emotional control of a narcissist, you become conditioned to believe that peace only exists when they're pleased. You tiptoe around their moods, adjust your tone, and sacrifice your needs just to keep things calm. But that's not peace, that's survival. Real peace doesn't come from pleasing someone unstable. It comes from learning to stand firm in your truth, even when it costs you their approval. Narcissists thrive on conflict, control, and confusion. They pull you into endless battles where logic and empathy never win. Every argument, every emotional outburst, every manipulation is designed to make you forget your center. They want you reactive because when you're reacting, you're not thinking clearly, you're not grounded. You're trapped in their emotional storm, trying to make sense of something that was never meant to be fair. But the moment you stop engaging in their chaos, the dynamic shifts. The war ends not because they surrendered, but because you walked away from the battlefield. Peace isn't about defeating the narcissist, it's about outgrowing the need to prove yourself to them. You can't win a game that's rigged against you, and you don't have to. Every time you choose silence over argument, every time you prioritize your calm over their drama, you're taking back your power. You're sending a silent message, asterisk, you no longer control my emotional weather, asterisk, and though they may rage, guilt trip, or play the victim to pull you back in, none of it works once you've truly decided that peace matters more than validation. At first, this peace feels uncomfortable. You've been conditioned to associate tension with connection. When things are calm, you'll wonder if you're being too distant, too cold, too detached, but this discomfort is simply the echo of old conditioning fading away. With time, you realize that peace doesn't mean emptiness, it means space, space to think, space to breathe. Space to rebuild yourself without their noise in your ear. True peace after narcissistic control is quiet but powerful. It's waking up without anxiety in your chest. It's no longer checking your phone in fear of what they'll say. It's finding joy in the simplest things again. Your own laughter, a quiet morning, your freedom. It's understanding that you don't need to justify your peace to anyone, least of all to someone who thrived on disturbing it. The greatest victory isn't showing the narcissist what they lost. It's reaching a place where you no longer care to. Peace is not about erasing the past, it's about releasing the hold it had on your present. When you reach that point, their chaos can rage outside you, but it no longer touches you inside. That's the kind of peace that can't be taken, only chosen, protected, and lived.